The cleaner's son answered a call from China. He was only 12 years old. He shouldn't have been in that place. He was just waiting for his mother to finish her shift. Minutes later, the SEO Millionaire's biggest contract was safe, and that changed everything. Eleanor adjusted her gloves for the third time before leaving the house. It wasn't nervousness without reason. The extra day shift always went wrong. At night, she was almost invisible. By day, everything was more exposed. The glances, the demands, the risk. Ethan watched his mother in silence, sitting at the small kitchen table with his backpack leaning between his feet. 12 years old, too much stillness for his age. He held a worn-out notebook with a plain cover, the kind that drew no attention from anyone, nor did he want it to. "It's just for today," Eleanor said without looking at her son. The regular cleaner was absent, and they needed reinforcement. "Is there an important meeting there?" Ethan nodded. He didn't ask anything. He had already learned that questions didn't pay overdue bills. The company building loomed, imposing from a distance. High glass, mirrored facade, people rushing in, as if time there was more valuable than anywhere else in the city. Eleanor took a deep breath before crossing the revolving door. In the reception area, the air conditioning was too cold. The security guard asked for her ID, verified the name, and only then noticed Ethan. "He'll stay with me," Eleanor said quickly before he could speak. The man frowned. "He can't walk around. He must stay in a corner and not touch anything." Eleanor thanked him more than necessary. Ethan didn't say a word. The elevator ascended silently to the services floor. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was already different. People walking fast, tense voices, coffee cups piled up on makeshift tables. It was not a common day. "Stay right there." Eleanor pointed to a chair against the corridor wall. "Don't get up. Don't talk to anyone." Ethan sat obediently, placed his backpack on his lap, and opened the notebook more out of habit than desire. The pages were filled with simple notes, loose words, some short sentences that no one there would recognize. They were in Mandarin, the language Grandma Anya had taught him since he was small. Eleanor pushed the cleaning cart carefully, trying not to make noise. Still, a woman in high heels passed quickly and shot her a hard look. "This is not a cleaning time," she complained without stopping. "Excuse me," Eleanor replied, lowering her head. Across the corridor, a large glass conference room caught the eye. Inside, well-dressed men and women spoke softly, but with urgency. One of them walked back and forth, cell phone in hand, expression tight. Julian Vance didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence did the work for him. "Today cannot go wrong," he said dryly. "If this contract falls through, the consequences will be severe." No one answered. They just nodded their heads. Eleanor was cleaning the floor near the closed door when she heard loose words escaping from the room. China. Confirmation. Deadline. She didn't understand the context, but she felt the weight. The kind of weight that makes the air denser. Ethan also listened. Not everything, just enough to perceive that something serious was at stake. He lowered his eyes to the notebook again, running his fingers over a word written in pencil, almost erased, something his grandmother used to repeat at home with a thick accent and a sad smile. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. The cleaning cart made a louder noise as it passed over a floor seam. "Can you be more careful?" someone complained from the end of the corridor. "Yes, sir," Eleanor replied, hurrying. Her body felt tense. Any error there seemed bigger than it really was. Any false step could cost her the shift or the job. An executive left the meeting room talking on his phone, face flushed, and almost collided with Ethan. He stopped upon seeing him sitting there. "Is this a daycare center now?" he commented loudly, provoking uncomfortable chuckles from passers-by. Eleanor heard it, pretending not to. Ethan felt his face burn but didn't react. He just lowered his head. Inside the room, tension increased. Papers scattered, people talking at the same time, someone saying time was running out. Julian hit the table once. If no one solves this, there is no point in finding any speech. The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor then received a quick order. "I need you to clean that support area now. There will be movement there." She nodded and pushed the cart toward the indicated space, near the most important rooms. Ethan got up from the chair and followed a few steps behind, as his mother had taught him early on, without drawing attention, without taking up space. The corridor seemed smaller there, narrower, more watched. The air carried a strange sensation, as if something were about to happen. Ethan leaned against the wall, observing. Eleanor cleaned quickly, her heart accelerating. Neither of them knew exactly what, but they both felt it. On that floor, Something important was hanging by a thread, and they were right in the middle of it, even without being seen. The executive floor seemed to breathe poorly that morning. The air conditioning was working, but no one seemed comfortable. Coffee cups accumulated, untouched on the tables. Lit screens showed graphs and numbers that no one had time to analyze calmly. The clock on the wall advanced cruelly. Julian Vance entered the meeting room without greeting anyone, took off his jacket, left it on the chair, and rested his hands on the glass table. "Let's go again," he said directly. "I want this presentation perfect before the call." No one replied. They simply started moving. An analyst opened the slides. Another executive reorganized printed documents. A third adjusted the projector, as if that would solve anything. The problem wasn't the material, it was the timing. "The Chinese firm has already postponed twice," Julian continued. "Today is the final confirmation. Either we close, or they will look for another partner. Has the interpreter confirmed?" Someone asked cautiously. Julian shot him a hard look. He said he would be available. Said, it wasn't the same as is. Everyone there knew it, but no one dared to say it aloud. Outside the room, Eleanor cleaned the floor with quick movements. The cart squeaked softly but seemed too loud in that tense environment. She wiped the floor, pretending not to hear, but voices pierced the glass. "Is the margin correct? If they question the clause, we are exposed. Legal has already reviewed this." Eleanor didn't understand the terms, but she recognized the tone. It was the same tone as when money was scarce, when the wrong choice cost dearly. Ethan observed from afar. Leaning against the wall, he felt that this was not a common day. The people there didn't speak loudly, but they spoke with urgency, as if any delay could bring down something too big to be rebuilt. An executive rushed out of the room with a cell phone to his ear. "I don't need it now," he said, trying to control his voice. "It's today. It can't be later." He hung up frustrated and went back inside. "The interpreter isn't answering," he reported in a low voice, but audibly enough. Julian closed his eyes for a second. Just one. When he opened them, the expression was even harder. "I don't care about the reason," he said. "Get someone. We can try the outsourced service," a woman sitting in the back suggested. "I already tried," another replied. "The center is out of service." An awkward silence settled. "Then improvise," Julian said. "You knew since last week that this call was going to happen." "We know English," someone tried. Julian tilted his head impatiently. "They don't want English. They want clarity, and they want it in Mandarin." From the corridor, Eleanor moved away from the door a little. She didn't want to seem curious. She didn't want to seem present. She just needed to finish the work. "You're making too much noise," a man complained as he passed her, pointing to the cart. "Excuse me," Eleanor said once more. Ethan clenched his fists inside his backpack, saying nothing. In the room, tension mounted as time passed. Someone opened a recent email and read aloud, translating quickly. "They say they need to confirm today, or they close the process." Julian leaned on the table again. "Listen carefully," he said firmly. "If this contract falls through, it won't just be a number on the report. There will be cuts. There will be consequences." No one moved. "I won't repeat myself," he finished. Outside, Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. That sentence wasn't said to her, but it hit her just the same. Cuts, consequences, words she knew too well. An executive rushed down the corridor, almost colliding with Ethan. He didn't even apologize. Ethan shrank a little more against the wall. "Mom," he called softly. "Not now," Eleanor replied without looking. Ethan opened the notebook slowly, not to study, just to calm down. He glanced over some handwritten words, memories of afternoons spent at Grandma's house. Familiar sounds, intonations that didn't match that building, but insisted on existing. In the room, someone tested the phone's speaker. The sound resonated through the corridor for a few seconds before being turned off. "When they call, someone will have to answer," Julian said. "And quickly." "But who?" the analyst asked tensely. Julian took a deep breath. "I don't know," he replied, "but someone will have to solve it." Outside, Eleanor continued pushing the cart. Ethan got up and followed her in silence. The corridor seemed even narrower there, quieter, as if the entire building were waiting for something to happen. Ethan stopped near the wall, hugging his backpack. His heart was beating fast, without him knowing exactly why. Inside the room, Julian looked at the clock. "They'll call any minute now," he said. No one answered. The problem was set, and no one there seemed ready to solve it. The sound of the phone cut the air in the room like an alarm. It wasn't loud, but it was insistent. a dry, repetitive sound that no one seemed to want to hear. Everyone looked at each other at the same time. Julian Vance was the first to react. "Answer it," he said, without raising his voice. No one moved. The phone rang again. An analyst extended her hand with hesitation, as if the device could bite. She brought it to her ear, listened for 2 seconds, and paled. "It's Mandarin," she said, covering the microphone. "They are already speaking." Julian closed his eyes for an instant. When he opened them, he was visibly more tense. "Pass it to someone," he ordered. The analyst turned to her colleagues, almost pleading. "Does anyone here understand?" Silence. "I recognize some words," a man ventured, "but I can't answer." The phone was still open. On the other side, the voice spoke quickly, impatiently. "Hang up," someone suggested in a panic. Julian slammed his hand on the table. "No," he said. "If we hang up, it's over." In the corridor, Eleanor pushed the cleaning cart toward the support area, indicated minutes earlier. She tried to move quickly, but nervousness hindered her. Every step seemed out of rhythm with that place. Ethan walked a few steps behind. As always, he observed more than he walked. The sound of the voice pierced the glass of the room and reached the corridor muffled. It wasn't possible to understand everything, but the tone was clear, irritated, tired, definitive. Ethan slowed his pace. The executive spoke again, now in English, with the phone still at her ear. "They're asking something I'm not managing to understand clearly," she said, almost whispering. "Ask, what exactly is missing for the contract?" Julian said dryly. She tried. "Excuse me," she began in English. The reply came immediately, harsher. She pulled the phone away from her ear. "They said something about not wanting English," she explained. Julian ran his hand over his face and asked about the interpreter, though he already knew the answer. Still not answering, someone replied. The executive tried to keep the call alive, repeating vague phrases, asking for a moment. As the seconds ran, from the corridor, Ethan stopped completely. The sound of the voice on the other side now came through the makeshift speaker, accidentally activated when the executive tried to change a setting. Ethan understood a complete sentence. Then another. His heart raced. "Mom," he called softly. Eleanor turned immediately, scared. "Not now, Ethan." But the boy wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking toward the meeting room. "They're saying they are going to hang up," he murmured, without realizing he was speaking louder than he intended. Eleanor felt the floor disappear. "Ethan, be quiet," she whispered, almost in a panic, but someone in the room heard. "What?" asked one of the executives, opening the glass door. "Who said that?" Ethan swallowed, feeling all eyes fall on him at once. "Was it him?" another asked, frowning. "The cleaner's son?" Eleanor dropped the cloth into the cart. "Excuse me," she said quickly. "He doesn't know what he's saying." "Yes, I do," Ethan replied, his voice a thread. They said, "Hang up." The silence that formed was different from all the others that day. It wasn't tension, it was strangeness. Julian approached the door, observing the boy as if he hadn't been there before. "Do you understand Mandarin?" he asked directly. Ethan hesitated, looking at his mother. Eleanor was pale. "A little," he replied. "I learned it from my grandmother." "This is not a game," an executive said. "We are talking about a multi-million-dollar contract." "I know," Ethan replied, lowering his eyes. "That's why I spoke." The phone was still open. The voice on the other side repeated something with increasing impatience. The executive held the device with both hands, unsure what to do. "Answer it," Julian said suddenly. It wasn't a gentle request. It was a tired command. The executive extended the phone toward him, but Julian didn't take it. He looked at Ethan. "You said you understand. Speak. What are they saying now?" Ethan took a deep breath. "They are asking if there is anyone there who speaks Mandarin," he replied. "And if there isn't, they are going to hang up." One of the executives let out a nervous laugh. "This is absurd." Julian didn't laugh. The phone made a small click on the other side. The call threatened to drop. Ethan took a step forward without realizing it. "Can I answer?" he said. "No," someone replied immediately. "This is adult business." "He's a child," said another. "This is madness." Eleanor felt her legs tremble. "Ethan, come here," she pleaded, almost crying, but the phone beeped again. A brief warning. "Last chance," the voice on the other side said, now audible even to those who didn't understand Mandarin. Ethan recognized the words, the tone, the decision. He looked at Julian. "They are going to hang up," he said now. Julian looked at the boy for 2 seconds that were too long. Then he looked around. He saw a room full of prepared, well-paid adults, unable to respond. Let him talk, Julian finally said. But someone started. If it goes wrong, the responsibility is mine, he cut in. But if we hang up now, it's over anyway. The executive brought the phone closer to Ethan, her hands trembling. The corridor seemed too small for that decision. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. He remembered his grandmother, the way she corrected his pronunciation with patience. He opened his eyes. "Good day," he said in Mandarin. It was nearly perfect, with a voice too steady for a 12-year-old. Everyone froze, and the silence that followed was no longer one of fear, it was one of shock. Ethan's first reply didn't come quickly, it came carefully. "Good day," he repeated now, a little firmer. "One moment, please." The voice on the other side of the line paused. Inside the room, no one moved. There was no audible celebration or astonishment, just that uncomfortable silence that arises when something unexpected happens, and no one knows how to react. Julian watched the boy attentively. There was no emotion on his face. There was calculation, evaluation. He knew this was the kind of moment that could solve everything, or definitively worsen it. "Ask what they need now," he said softly, almost as if he didn't want to be heard. Ethan nodded slightly. He didn't look back. He didn't look for his mother. The phone trembled a little in his hand, but he kept his voice stable. "What else is necessary for confirmation?" he asked in Mandarin. The answer came back too long. Ethan frowned for an instant, not because he didn't understand, but because he needed to mentally organize what he was hearing. They were more technical terms than he was used to. He took a deep breath. "They are saying they need to confirm 2 points, he translated. "A deadline and a clause about liability." A murmur ran through the room. "What clause?" an executive asked, already opening a document. Ethan returned to the phone and asked carefully. The man replied faster now, less aggressive, still impatient, but attentive. Ethan listened until the end. "It's about delay in delivery," he explained. "They want a formal written guarantee still today." Julian made a quick gesture with his hand. "Tell him the legal department is already adjusting that, and that we will send the email in minutes." Ethan nodded, but he hesitated before repeating it. Something in the sentence needed to be adjusted. He knew it. "Wait," he said softly. "If I say it like that, it sounds like a vague promise." Julian looked at him intently. "Then how would you say it?" Ethan thought for 2 seconds. "I would say the document is already in final review and that the sending is scheduled," he replied. "Not that we are going to try." Julian nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Ethan returned to the phone. The reply came shorter. This time, the tone on the other side had changed. It was no longer one of threat. It was one of negotiation. Ethan slightly relaxed his shoulders without realizing it. "They want to know who is speaking," he translated. One of the executives let out a nervous laugh. "Tell him it's someone began." Julian interrupted. "Tell him your first name." Ethan swallowed. "My name is Ethan," he said. There was a pause. The reply came softer than before. "They asked if I am the person responsible for the negotiation," he translated, confused. Julian took a step closer. "Tell him you are assisting the responsible team," he guided. Ethan repeated it, choosing his words carefully. The man replied with something he didn't immediately understand. A word escaped him. He closed his eyes for a second. "Can you repeat, please?" he asked in Mandarin. A little slower. The entire room held its breath. The repetition came clearer. Ethan understood. "They want the name of the person signing the contract," he said, looking at Julian. "Me," he replied, without hesitation. Ethan informed him. The conversation continued for a few more minutes. They weren't long, but they seemed eternal to those watching from outside. Ethan didn't give speeches. He didn't try to impress. He just answered, translated, confirmed. At one point, he almost got confused with a legal term. He stopped in the middle of the sentence. "Wait," he said quietly, covering the microphone with his hand. "Confirm this part for me." A lawyer quickly approached, pointing at the document. "That's right." Ethan nodded and resumed. On the other side of the line, the man took a deep breath. "Ethan," he heard it clearly. "He said he will wait for the email," he translated, "and that if he receives it today, the process continues." Julian signaled to the legal department. Now Ethan's final sentence came calm. "We will confirm, in writing within a few minutes. Thank you for your patience." He moved the phone away from his ear. The dry click of the finished call resonated louder than it should have. For a few seconds, no one said anything. There was no applause, no celebration, just people looking at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. "Who is this kid?" someone murmured, almost voiceless. Ethan felt the weight of the silence fall upon him. The phone was still in his hand. He returned it to the executive carefully, as if it were something too fragile. "Can I go?" he asked softly. Eleanor immediately took a step forward. "We're leaving now," she said quickly, her voice trembling. Julian raised his hand. "One moment," he requested. Eleanor froze. Julian looked at Ethan again. Now there was no calculation. There was something more difficult to define. "You said you learned it from your grandmother," he commented. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. I want to understand that better," he said, choosing his words next. Ethan nodded without knowing if that was good or bad. Outside the room, the legal department was already frantically typing. The contract was not yet closed, but it was not lost, and everyone there knew it. Nothing would ever be the same after that moment. The sun was no longer entering the windows with the same intensity when Eleanor finished the last corridor. The building was quieter. The morning rush was behind them, replaced by a contained fatigue, the kind that comes after prolonged tension. Ethan was sitting in one of the chairs in the support area, hugging his backpack against his chest. He didn't speak at all. Since they had left the meeting room, no one had said exactly what was going to happen. They only knew that they hadn't been kicked out yet. "Are you okay?" Eleanor asked softly as she put the cloth back in the cart. Ethan nodded without much conviction. "I'm fine." In reality, he didn't know how to say it. His body was there, but his head was still trapped in that moment when all the adults had stopped to listen to him. He didn't like that feeling. He didn't like being the center of attention, much less in that place. An assistant appeared a few minutes later. "Mr. Julian asked you to wait," he said in a neutral tone. "He'll call you soon." Eleanor felt her stomach churn. "Now?" she asked faintly. The man walked away without waiting for an answer. Eleanor sat down next to her son, ran her hand through his hair in an automatic gesture, trying to calm herself more than the boy. "God help us," she murmured. Ethan didn't reply. He was thinking of his grandmother, of the way she said that, when one does something right, one doesn't always understand why, at the moment, but one understands later. Almost an hour passed before the same assistant returned. "You can come in." Julian Vance's office was smaller than Ethan imagined. It had nothing grandiose about it. An overly tidy desk, 2 chairs in front, a window with a view of the city, a functional, cold, but not hostile space. Julian was without his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He seemed more tired than powerful. "You can sit down," he said, pointing to the chairs. Eleanor sat down carefully, as if she were occupying a place that didn't belong to her. Ethan sat next to her, keeping his hands on his backpack. For a few seconds, no one said anything. "I said a while ago that I wanted to understand better," Julian began, breaking the silence. "And I still do, but not to reproach, but to comprehend." Eleanor squeezed her fingers. "We didn't want to cause trouble," she said quickly. "I know I shouldn't have brought my son, but it was only for today. It was a favor I asked." Julian raised his hand, interrupting. "It's not about that," he said. "That is over." He returned his gaze to Ethan. "You seem very young to carry that kind of responsibility," he commented. Ethan shrugged. "I didn't want responsibility," he replied. "I just didn't want it to go wrong." Julian nodded slowly. "You talked about your grandmother," he said. "Tell me calmly." Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't like talking about that part of his life with strangers, but something in Julian's tone wasn't invasive. It was attentive. "She came from China when she was young," he began. "She married here, but she never really felt like she was from here." Eleanor watched in silence. That story wasn't new, but hearing her son tell it gave it another dimension. "She used to say that if she stopped speaking Mandarin, she would disappear," Ethan continued. "So she spoke with me all the time about simple things, about the day, about nostalgia." Julian listened without interrupting. "I stayed with her almost every night," Ethan said. "My mom worked. We ate dinner together. She taught me words like someone teaches affection." Ethan hesitated for an instant before continuing. "When she got sick, she stopped leaving the house," he said. "But she continued talking to me, even tired, even weak." Eleanor swallowed. "She was the one who stayed when Ethan's father left," she completed. "We supported each other as best we could." Julian looked away toward the window for a moment. "Is she still alive?" he asked. "No," Ethan replied, his voice a thread. 2 years ago. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was respectful. "So," Julian said, returning his gaze to him. "You didn't learn Mandarin to use it. You learned it so as not to lose someone." Ethan nodded. I think so. Julian took a deep breath, folding his hands over the desk. Today, everyone in that room was prepared, he said. Diplomas, positions, experience, and still, no one could solve it. He paused. You could because you listened before. For a long time, Eleanor felt her eyes well up, but she didn't say anything. I don't believe in coincidences, Julian continued. I believe in contexts, and your context is tough. He leaned back in his chair. I still need to finish some things today, he said. But I want to make one thing clear. Eleanor stiffened. What happened will not be ignored, he stated. Not as a favor, not as charity. Ethan squeezed the strap of his backpack. I don't want anything, he said quickly. Julian smiled slightly. Not an easy smile, a tired smile. I know, he replied. And that is precisely why I want to think carefully about what comes next. He stood up. Tomorrow or the day after, I'll call you again, he said unhurriedly, without alarm. Eleanor got up too, unsure. Thank you for not, she began, not knowing how to finish. Foreseeing, he completed. She nodded. Julian opened the door. Sometimes, he said, you only realize what you have when you almost lose it. In the corridor, Eleanor and Ethan walked together in silence. The building seemed different now. No less cold, but different. Mom, Ethan said, already near the elevator. Did I do the right thing? Eleanor stopped. She looked at her son firmly. You did the right thing, she replied, even if nothing else happens. Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time since early morning, he didn't feel afraid of what he had done. The next morning, the company woke up differently, not calmer, just less chaotic. The crisis had not been forgotten, but it had been contained. The Chinese contract still required adjustments, revisions, signatures. Nothing was officially closed. Still, no one spoke of collapse anymore. Julian Vance arrived early, before most. He entered the building without long greetings, as he always did. But something about him was off-pattern. It wasn't anxiety. It was unease. He went straight to the reception and up to his office. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and reread the email sent the night before. The confirmation from the Chinese partners was objective, without praise, without enthusiasm, just professional. That's how it worked in the real world. It always worked. Still, Julian couldn't shake an image from his head. A boy sitting in a corridor holding an old backpack, while well-prepared adults stalled in front of a problem, too simple to be ignored. He closed his laptop harder than he intended. Shortly after, he called the legal department, asked for the report, reviewed details, and confirmed that everything was being done on schedule. When he finished, he rested his elbows on the desk and remained there still for a few seconds. It was not common for him. Eleanor arrived for the extra shift at the same time as always. She didn't comment on anything to anyone. She put on her uniform, took the cart, and began work as if nothing had happened. That was how she survived, not creating expectations. But the glances had changed. An executive greeted her with a nod. A man made space in the corridor without complaining. Small gestures, nothing explicit, yet different. Eleanor noticed it. She pretended not to notice it. Ethan was not there that day. School had resumed classes. The notebook was now on a simple desk in a common classroom, while his mother walked through corridors that until yesterday seemed unreachable. Midway through the morning, Julian left his office and walked the floor. He didn't announce his presence. He just observed. He saw focused executives, others tense, some oblivious. He passed by the support area, where the day before Eleanor had pushed the cart too quickly. He stopped there for an instant. Eleanor, he called. She turned immediately, her heart racing. Yes, sir. Julian noticed the reflex. That wasn't respect. It was trained fear. Can you come with me for a minute? He asked. Eleanor hesitated only long enough to drop the cloth. Of course. They walked to a small room away from the main area. It wasn't a meeting room. It was almost a little-used secondary office. Sit down, Julian said, pointing to the chair. Eleanor sat down carefully. I won't take much of your time, he began. I just need to clarify some things. She remained silent. Yesterday, Julian said, you apologized several times before anyone said anything. Eleanor squeezed her hands in her lap. It's habit, she replied. One learns to anticipate. Julian was silent for a few seconds. Why did you bring your son? He asked without harshness. Eleanor took a deep breath. Because I didn't have a choice, she replied. School was closed. I needed the extra shift, and I needed to keep the job. Julian nodded slowly. You knew that could cost you your job. I know, she said, but sometimes the risk already exists, even if one doesn't choose it. The answer hung in the air. You never talked about what your son knows, Julian commented. I never thought it mattered, Eleanor replied. Not for this kind of place. Julian leaned his back against the chair. This kind of place, he repeated. That's what makes me uncomfortable. He leaned forward a little. Yesterday, a room full of professionals stalled, he said. Not because of incompetence, but because of structure, because of habit, because of assuming that certain resources always come from the same places. Eleanor didn't reply. Your son didn't save a contract, Julian continued. He saved a conversation because he listened before, because he wasn't afraid to look small. Eleanor felt her eyes sting but maintained her posture. It wasn't luck, he said. It was character and attention. Julian stood up. I won't pretend this didn't happen, he affirmed. And I won't turn it into a spectacle either. He walked to the door, then turned back to her. I know I already said it, but I want you and your son to come back here another day, calmly, outside of the shift, to talk properly. Eleanor's stomach contracted. If it's too, she started. It's not dismissal, he cut in, nor a warning. She looked at him suspiciously. I need to think, Julian continued, and you need to understand what this means. Eleanor stood up. Thank you for calling me, she said, not knowing if that was good or bad. Julian opened the door. Sometimes, he said, the company needs to be confronted to remember who is inside it. Eleanor left the room with a heavy heart, but different. Not relieved, not hopeful, just attentive. At the end of the shift, she called Ethan. He wants to talk to us again, she said. Is it a good thing? Her son asked on the other end. Eleanor looked at the building before answering. I don't know yet, she said, but it's a serious thing. Ethan was silent for a few seconds. Then, that's fine, he replied. We'll go together. Eleanor hung up and took a deep breath. Some doors don't open suddenly, they creak first, and Julian knew it. If he ignored that creak, he wouldn't be saving a contract. He would be losing something much greater. Julian didn't schedule the conversation for the next day, nor did he let too much time pass. He waited just long enough for the dust to settle, but not so long that it seemed like forgetfulness. 3 days later, he asked for Eleanor to be contacted. Mr. Julian would like to speak with you and your son, the voice on the other end of the line said. It can be tomorrow afternoon. Eleanor hung up with the strange feeling of someone stepping on unstable ground. It wasn't a formal summons, nor was it kindness. It was something in between, and that kept her on alert. The next day, she arrived earlier than agreed. She wore the same simple clothes as always, but she had spent more time than usual choosing them. Ethan walked beside her, backpack on his back, expression closed. He wasn't afraid. He was suspicious. They were led to a smaller room, away from the meeting areas and the most trafficked corridors. A neutral space with a simple table, 3 chairs, and a side window. Julian was already there when they entered. Thank you for coming, he said, standing up. You can sit down. There was no exaggerated formality, nor was there intimacy, just clarity. Julian waited for them to settle before continuing. I have thought a lot since that day, he began. Not just about the contract, but about what happened around it. Eleanor kept her hands crossed in her lap. Ethan looked at the table. What your son did was not common, he said. But it wasn't a miracle either. It was a consequence. Ethan looked up, confused. A consequence of what? He asked. Of time, Julian replied. Of listening, of attention, of something that is not usually valued in environments like this. He took a deep breath before continuing. I don't want to turn this into a nice story, he continued. It doesn't seem fair to you or to me. Eleanor swallowed. Then I'll be direct. He opened a folder and placed some papers on the table. Ethan, you are 12 years old. You are not an adult. You are not an employee. And you shouldn't carry responsibilities that are not yours. Ethan nodded slowly. That's why, Julian said. Any proposal I make is not about now. It's about what comes next. He slid one of the papers toward them. I want to offer you a scholarship that includes intensive language instruction, Mandarin included, with material, transportation, and educational support. Ethan opened his eyes. I didn't ask for this, he said quickly. I know, Julian replied. That's why I'm offering it. Eleanor felt her heart beat strongly. And it's not a favor, he continued. It's an investment. Because talent without structure is lost. Ethan bit his lower lip. I don't want my mom to have problems because of me, he said. Julian turned to Eleanor. Your mom won't have problems, he affirmed. On the contrary. He pulled out another document. Eleanor, I don't know exactly how your current contract works, he said, but I know it's not fair. Eleanor felt her face burn. I work nights, she replied. I take extras when they call. And you live on the edge, he completed. That is not sustainable either, he explained the options carefully. Shift adjustment, permanent team hire, basic benefits. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that seemed like a prize. I'm not offering money in exchange for what happened, he said. I'm offering dignity, so you don't have to choose between working and protecting your son. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at his mother. Eleanor didn't know what to say. All of that seemed too big to absorb at once. I don't know if I can accept, Eleanor finally said. I've never received anything like this. Julian nodded. Accepting is not begging, he replied. It is recognizing that someone saw value where before there was only function. Ethan squeezed the strap of his backpack. My grandmother, he began, doubting. She would have liked this. Julian smiled slightly. I imagine so. He leaned back in his chair. I don't need an answer now, he said. Think, talk, come back when you want. Eleanor took a deep breath. And if we say no? She asked. Then nothing changes? He replied. But I hope you don't say no. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then lifted his gaze. If I accept, he said, it's because I want to learn, not because I once answered a phone. Julian nodded. That's exactly what I expect. When they left the room, the corridor seemed less hostile, not more welcoming, just human. Eleanor walked slowly, as if she was still afraid that someone would say that all of that was a mistake. In the elevator, Ethan broke the silence. Mom, he said, if we accept, life is going to change. Eleanor thought, before replying. It's going to change, she said, but not because someone wanted it to, but because you opened a door that already existed. Ethan rested his head against the elevator glass. He didn't know exactly what would come next, but he knew one thing. He would not return to the same place as before. The following days were strange. Eleanor continued her routine as if nothing had changed, because in practice, it hadn't changed yet. She arrived for her shift, cleaned the corridors, avoided glances, but something inside her was moving. A silent hope that she didn't dare to name. Ethan also felt that strangeness. At school, his classmates talked about everyday things, video games, series, unimportant gossip, and he felt like he was carrying something different. Now it wasn't pride, it was weight. The weight of having done something important without having planned it. One afternoon, when Eleanor arrived home after her shift, she found Ethan sitting on the sofa with his notebook open, but he wasn't writing. He was just looking at the pages. What's wrong? She asked, placing her bag on the table. Ethan took a while to answer. I was thinking about Grandma, he said, about everything she taught me. Eleanor sat down next to him. She would be proud. Ethan nodded. But I don't know if I deserve all of this. Eleanor looked at him intently. It's not about deserving, Ethan. It's about taking advantage of it. He lowered his gaze. I'm afraid of disappointing. Eleanor ran her hand through her son's hair. We are all afraid, she replied. But fear is no reason not to try. Ethan closed the notebook. Are you going to accept what Mr. Julian offered? He asked. Eleanor took a deep breath. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I think it would be foolish not to. Then let's do it, Ethan said. Together. Eleanor smiled. Together, she repeated. 2 days later, Eleanor called the number Julian had given her. The voice on the other side connected her directly to him. Good day, Eleanor, Julian said. Have you thought about it? Yes, she replied. We want to accept. There was a brief pause on the other side. I'm glad to hear that, he said. I'll start organizing everything. Can you come in on Monday? Yes, sir, Eleanor replied. When she hung up, she felt her hands tremble, not from fear, but from something akin to hope. Ethan was in his room when she entered. That's it, she said. We accepted. Ethan looked up. And now? Now, Eleanor said. We start over. The weekend passed slowly. Eleanor tried to remain calm, but anxiety dominated her. She cleaned the house more than necessary. She organized things that were already organized. She cooked with more attention than usual. Ethan, for his part, spent hours rereading the notebook. His grandmother's words seemed more alive now, more real, as if she were there guiding him. On Sunday night, Eleanor sat with Ethan at the kitchen table. I want you to know something, she said. What's coming won't be easy. Ethan nodded. I know. There will be people who think we don't deserve this, she continued. That it was luck, that it was coincidence. Ethan looked at her intently. And what do you think? Eleanor smiled slightly. I think we worked hard all our lives, and this is not a gift, it's recognition. Ethan nodded. Then, that's fine. Monday arrived with a strange clarity. The sky was clear, the air fresh. Eleanor dressed with more care than usual. Not elegant clothes, just clean, ironed, dignified. Ethan also prepared. He put the notebook in his backpack, as he always did. He didn't know if he would need it, but it gave him security to carry it. They arrived at the building before the agreed time. The security guard recognized them this time. "Good day," he said with a brief smile. Eleanor nodded, still surprised. "Good day." They went up to the floor where Julian's office was. This time there was no tension in the air, only expectation. When they entered, Julian was already waiting for them. He had several documents on the desk, all organized with precision. "Sit down," he said. "We're going to review everything calmly." They spent the next hour going over the details. The school for Ethan, the contract change for Eleanor, the benefits, the schedules, the responsibilities. Everything was explained clearly, without fine print, without tricks. "Do you have questions?" Julian asked at the end. Eleanor hesitated before speaking. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really?" Julian leaned back in his chair. "Because that day I realized something," he replied. "This company has resources, has trained people, has structure, but we almost lost everything because we didn't know how to see what we had in front of us." He looked at Ethan. "Your son didn't just solve a problem. He showed me that talent is everywhere. We just sometimes don't look for it in the right places." Eleanor felt her eyes well up. "Thank you," she said simply. Julian nodded. "Don't thank me yet. The real work starts now." Ethan looked at the documents on the table. "When do I start at the new school?" he asked. "Next week," Julian replied. "They are already aware of your arrival." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of reality. It was real. It was happening. Eleanor signed the papers with a trembling hand. Each signature seemed to close one stage and open another. When she finished, Julian extended his hand. "Welcome to the permanent team," he said. Eleanor shook his hand, feeling for the first time in a long time that she was not invisible. Ethan also signed the scholarship documents. His signature was small, shaky, but it was there. When they left the office, the world seemed different. Nothing had changed on the street, in the building, in the city, but something inside them was different. In the elevator, Eleanor hugged her son. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan nodded against his mother's shoulder. "We did it," he repeated. When the elevator doors opened, they walked out together onto the street. The sun shone stronger. Now the city seemed clearer, livelier. Eleanor took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Ethan walked beside her, backpack on his back, looking ahead. He didn't know exactly what awaited him, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone, and that was enough. That night, Eleanor called her Aunt Chloe to tell her everything. The conversation lasted more than an hour. There were tears, laughter, disbelief. When she hung up, Eleanor sat on the sofa and looked around. The house was the same, small, modest, with walls that needed painting. But now, it seemed different. It seemed like a starting point, not a limit. Ethan was in his room writing in his notebook, not words in Mandarin this time, but thoughts in English. Reflections on what had happened, on what was to come. He wrote about his grandmother, about how she had given him something without knowing it. Not just a language, but the ability to listen, to pay attention, to not be afraid. He closed the notebook and put it in his backpack. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new, and he was ready. The first week at the new school was harder than Ethan had imagined, not because the classes were complicated, but because everything was different. The corridors were wider, the classrooms had better lighting, the desks didn't creak when you sat down. Even the smell was distinct, a mix of new books and expensive cleaning products. Ethan arrived on the first day with the worn backpack he had used for years. Eleanor had wanted to buy him a new one, but he refused. "I don't need to change everything at once," he had said, and she understood. The principal received him personally. "Welcome, Ethan," she said with a professional smile. "I hope you feel comfortable here." Ethan nodded without saying much. The woman led him to his classroom, a spacious area with large windows that let in natural light. The other students were already seated, conversing among themselves with familiarity. When he entered, some turned to look at him. Others didn't even look up. "Class, we have a new classmate," the teacher announced. "Ethan, you can sit back there by the window." Ethan walked between the desks, feeling every gaze. He sat down in silence, took out his worn notebook, and placed it on the table. A boy next to him looked at him curiously, but said nothing. The class began. It was math, a subject Ethan dominated well, but he didn't participate. He kept his head down, took notes, tried to go unnoticed. It was his strategy, the one that had always worked. At recess, he stayed in the classroom while the others ran out to the yard. He wasn't hungry, he didn't feel like socializing, he just wanted the day to end. A girl approached him before leaving. "Aren't you going out?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "I'm fine here." The girl shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm Valentina, by the way." "Ethan," he replied, although she already knew. Valentina left, and Ethan stayed alone. He looked out the window toward the yard. Groups of students talked, laughed, shared food. Everyone seemed to have known each other for years. Everyone seemed to belong. He did not. The afternoon passed slowly. More classes, more glances, more silence. When the dismissal bell finally rang, Ethan was the first to get up. He packed his things quickly and left without saying goodbye. Eleanor was waiting for him at the school gate. She had requested permission from work to be there. When she saw her son come out, she immediately noticed the expression on his face. "How was it?" she asked, as they walked toward the bus stop. "Fine," Ethan replied without looking at her. Eleanor knew it wasn't true, but she didn't insist. Give him time, she thought. He just needs time. That night, Ethan barely touched his dinner, shut himself in his room, and opened the notebook. He wrote a single sentence. "I don't know if I belong here." The following days were similar. Ethan attended classes, paid attention, did his homework, but didn't talk to anyone, didn't ask questions, didn't raise his hand even if he knew the answers. The teachers began to notice him. In the staff room, they commented on the new boy who was smart but too quiet. "We should talk to him," one suggested. "Give him time," another replied. "It's normal for him to be nervous." But Eleanor couldn't stay calm. She saw her son close himself off more each day. She saw how he returned home with the same empty expression, how he pretended everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. One night after dinner, she sat in front of him. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said. He lifted his gaze from the notebook. "About what?" "About school. About how you really feel." Ethan sighed. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't lie to me," Eleanor said firmly. "I know you. I know when something is bothering you." Ethan lowered his gaze. "It's not that something is bothering me," he said slowly. "It's just that I don't fit in." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Why do you say that?" "Because everyone there comes from different families," Ethan explained. "They have new clothes, expensive cell phones. They talk about trips and things I've never had. And I'm the cleaner's son." Eleanor felt tears well up, but she held them back. "Listen to me well," she said, taking her son's hands. "You are not less than anyone because of that. You earned your place in that school because you have talent, because you have dedication." Ethan shook his head. "No one sees me that way, Mom. They see me as the poor kid who got lucky." Eleanor squeezed his hands. "Then, prove them wrong." Ethan looked at her, confused. "How?" "By being yourself," she replied. "Not hiding, not pretending to be someone you're not, showing what you know, what you can do." Ethan didn't answer, but something in his eyes changed slightly. The next day, Ethan arrived at school with the same worn backpack, the same simple clothes, but something in his posture was different. He didn't walk with his head so low. In Mandarin class, the teacher asked for volunteers to read a text aloud. No one raised their hand. Everyone looked at the book with confused expressions. The teacher sighed. "No one wants to try?" Silence. Ethan felt his heart beat faster. He remembered his mother's words. He remembered his grandmother's voice. He remembered that day in the building when he had to decide whether to speak or remain silent. He raised his hand. The teacher looked at him, surprised. "Ethan, do you want to try?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." He stood up, took the book, and began to read. His pronunciation was perfect, fluid, natural. The words came out effortlessly, with the correct accent, with the precise intonation. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at him now, but not with mockery or superficial curiosity. They looked at him with genuine amazement. When he finished, the teacher applauded. "Excellent, Ethan. Truly excellent. Where did you learn to speak like that?" "With my grandmother," Ethan replied simply. The teacher nodded, impressed. "It shows that you learned from someone who really knew the language. She was a native speaker, wasn't she?" "Yes," Ethan said, "from Beijing." During recess, several students approached him. Valentina was the first. "That was incredible," she said. "Seriously, you speak Mandarin that well?" Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." Can you teach me? She asked. I'm failing that class. Ethan hesitated. I'm not a teacher, he said. But you speak better than the teacher, she insisted. Please. Ethan looked around. Other students also seemed interested. Okay, he finally said. I can help you. Valentina smiled. Thanks. Let's have lunch together. Ethan nodded. Sure. For the first time since he had arrived at that school, he didn't eat lunch alone. He sat with Valentina and 2 other students who also had difficulties with Mandarin. They talked about the class, about the teacher, about the homework. It wasn't a magical transformation. Ethan still felt out of place in many aspects, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, when Eleanor picked him up, she immediately noticed the change. Ethan didn't smile broadly, but he also didn't have that empty expression of the previous days. How was today? She asked. Better, Ethan replied. Much better. Eleanor smiled. I'm glad to hear that. On the bus ride home, Ethan told her about the Mandarin class, about how he had read aloud, about how the other students had approached him. Eleanor listened with a full heart. This was the son she knew, the one who wasn't afraid to show what he knew, the one who helped without expecting anything in return. When they arrived home, Ethan took out the notebook and crossed out the sentence he had written days earlier. I don't know if I belong here. Below it, he wrote a new one. I'm still finding my place, but I will find it. The following weeks brought more changes. Ethan began to participate more in class, not only in Mandarin, but in all subjects. The teachers noticed his intelligence, his dedication, his ability to analyze. In math, he solved a problem that no one else had been able to. In history, he gave a presentation on Chinese immigration in Canada that impressed the entire class. In literature, he wrote an essay on the importance of preserving mother tongues that the teacher read aloud as an example. Little by little, Ethan stopped being the new kid to become simply Ethan, the brilliant student, the classmate willing to help, the one who spoke Mandarin as if he had been born there. But not everything was easy. There were moments of doubt, days when he felt exhausted by the effort of constantly proving his worth, nights when he wondered if it would ever be enough. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult exam, he came home quieter than usual. Eleanor noticed it immediately. What happened? She asked. Ethan dropped his backpack on the sofa. Nothing, he said. I'm just tired. Eleanor sat down next to him. It's more than that, Ethan sighed. Sometimes I feel like I have to be perfect, he admitted, as if any mistake will confirm what some people think, that I shouldn't be there. Eleanor took his face between her hands. Listen to me well, she said, looking him in the eyes. You don't have to be perfect. No one is. The only thing you have to do is your best, and you are already doing that. Ethan felt the tears well up. It's hard, Mom. I know, she replied. But look at everything you've already achieved. Look how far you've come. Ethan nodded, letting the tears fall. Eleanor hugged him tightly, letting him vent. When they separated, Ethan wiped his face. Thank you, Mom. Always, she replied. That night, Ethan wrote a long reflection in his notebook about the pressure, about the expectations, about the fear of failure, but also about gratitude, about opportunities, about his mother's love and his grandmother's memory. He finished with a phrase that he would repeat to himself on difficult days. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be authentic. At the end of the first month, the school organized a cultural presentation. Each student had to share something about their heritage or interests. Many chose elaborate presentations with videos and music. Ethan chose something simpler. He stood in front of the class and recited a poem in Mandarin that his grandmother used to tell him. He recited it slowly, with emotion, his voice cracking slightly in some parts. When he finished, there was a deep silence, then applause. Valentina approached him afterward. That was beautiful, she said, her eyes bright. Your grandmother would be proud. Ethan smiled. I hope so. That afternoon, when Eleanor came to pick him up, Ethan ran to her with a genuine smile. Mom, he said, I think I finally found my place. Eleanor hugged him tightly. You always had it, she replied. You just needed time to see it. They walked together toward the bus stop, talking about the day, about the presentation, about plans for the weekend. For the first time in a long time, both felt at peace. The path had not been easy. There would still be challenges ahead, but now they knew something fundamental. They were not alone, and that made all the difference. While Ethan adapted to his new school reality, Eleanor faced her own transformation. The change from the night shift to the day shift had been more significant than she imagined, not only because of the recovered sleep hours, but because of everything that represented. For the first time in years, she could walk through the company corridors in the daylight. She could see the faces of the people with whom she shared the building. She could feel that she existed, not just as a shadow that passed at night cleaning up what others dirtied. But the transition was not simple. On the first day of the fixed shift, Eleanor arrived at the building with a mixture of nervousness and hope. The security guard greeted her differently this time. "Good day, Eleanor," he said, using her name. "You already have your new ID at reception." Eleanor nodded, still unaccustomed to being recognized. "Thank you." At reception, a woman handed her the new ID. "This one is permanent," she explained. "You don't need to renew it every month anymore." Eleanor took the card with trembling hands. It was a small thing, but for her, it meant stability. It meant she wasn't temporary, that they couldn't fire her overnight without reason. She went up to the services floor where she would now be based. The supervisor was waiting for her there, a middle-aged man named Robert, who had been with the company for 20 years. "Welcome to the team, Eleanor," he said, extending his hand. "We're going to work well together." Eleanor shook his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." Robert showed her the new assigned areas. He explained the schedules, the routines, the expectations. Everything was more organized than before, more structured. It was no longer a matter of showing up when called and doing what was urgent. Now there was a plan, a system, a rhythm. "You'll notice we work differently here," Robert said as they walked. "It's not just about cleaning. It's about maintaining, anticipating, caring for the spaces." Eleanor listened attentively, absorbing every word. "I understand. And another thing," he continued, "everyone here treats each other with respect. It doesn't matter the position. We are a team." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight for so long that she didn't even notice it anymore. It was the constant fear, the always being on alert, the expecting mistreatment as something normal. "Thank you," she said, simply because she couldn't find other words. The first days were for adaptation. Eleanor met her new colleagues, 3 other members of the cleaning team who worked the same shift, 2 women and a man, all with years of experience. At first, they were cautious with her. They knew she had arrived differently, that her story was particular, but Eleanor didn't expect special treatment. She worked hard, arrived early, stayed until everything was completed. One of her colleagues, a woman named Patricia, approached her after the first week. "You work well," she commented while they organized the carts. "You don't stand around waiting for others to do your part." Eleanor shrugged. "That's how I was taught." Patricia smiled. "It shows. By the way, some of us grab coffee before the shift. If you want to join, you're welcome." Eleanor felt something warm expand in her chest. "I'd like that," she replied. It was a simple gesture, a casual invitation, but for Eleanor, it meant acceptance. It meant she wasn't just the one Julian Vance helped, but another colleague. The mornings began to have a new rhythm. Eleanor woke up early, prepared breakfast for Ethan, accompanied him to the bus stop, and then took hers to work. She arrived 15 minutes before her shift. She had coffee with Patricia and the others, talking about everyday things. It was a normal life, and for Eleanor, who had never had a truly normal life, that was extraordinary. But not everything was easy. There were still glances. There were still whispers. "That's the woman they talk about," Eleanor heard one day, while passing through a corridor, "the one the boss helped." "Yes," another voice replied. "Because of the son who saved the Chinese contract." Eleanor squeezed the cart handle tighter and kept walking. She didn't stop, didn't look back, but the words kept echoing. That night, while having dinner with Ethan, he noticed her silence. "Are you okay, Mum?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "Just tired." But Ethan knew her too well. "It's more than that," Eleanor sighed. "Sometimes I hear what people say," she admitted, "about us, about how we got here." Ethan put down his fork. "What do they say? That it was luck? That it was a favor? That it's not by merit?" Eleanor explained. "And even though I know it's not true, sometimes words weigh heavily." Ethan looked at his mother with a maturity that didn't match his 12 years. "You know what I learned at school?" he said. "That people will always have opinions, but the only thing that matters is what you know about yourself." Eleanor smiled, her eyes moist. "When did you get so wise?" "When I had a mom who taught me not to give up," he replied with a small smile. Eleanor extended her hand across the table, and Ethan took it. They both remained like that for a moment, in silence, reminding each other that they were not alone. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor began to feel more comfortable in her new role. She knew the spaces better, anticipated needs, worked efficiently. Robert complimented her regularly on her performance. One day, while cleaning near the executive offices, she saw Julian leave a meeting. He noticed her and approached. "Eleanor, how are you doing?" he asked. "Good, sir," she replied. "Thank you." Julian shook his head. "Don't thank me. You earned this." Eleanor nodded, but something in her expression made Julian stop. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "Sometimes I wonder if people think I don't deserve to be here," she admitted. That it was only because Ethan helped that day. Julian looked at her intently. "And what do you think?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I think I have worked all my life, that I have been responsible, dedicated, that I have never been absent without reason, that I deserve stability as much as anyone." "Exactly," Julian said. "And if anyone thinks differently, that's their problem, not yours." Eleanor felt something strengthen inside her. "You're right," Julian nodded. "Keep working the way you are. Results speak for themselves." When he walked away, Eleanor stood still for a moment. Then she returned to her work, but now, with her back a little straighter, her head a little higher. That afternoon, Patricia invited her to lunch with the team in the staff cafeteria. It was the first time Eleanor had entered there as a permanent employee. Before, when she did sporadic night shifts, she ate alone in a corner, quickly, without drawing attention. Now she sat at a table with her colleagues, talking, laughing. They talked about their families, their weekend plans, their everyday worries. "My daughter wants a dog," Patricia was saying. "But we live in a small condo. Mine wants to go to a concert," another commented. "But tickets are so expensive." Eleanor listened more than she spoke, but she felt part of something. It was a new, warm, comforting feeling. "And your son?" Patricia asked. "How is he doing in the new school?" Eleanor smiled. "Good. He had a difficult start, but now he's finding his place." "He's a good kid," Robert, who had joined the table, commented. "I saw him that day of the call. He has grit." Eleanor nodded proudly. "He does." When lunch ended, Eleanor returned to her work, feeling different. Not only grateful for the opportunity, but deserving of it. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a favor. It was recognition of years of hard work, of silent dedication, of never having given up. At the end of the day, while putting her things in the assigned locker, another symbol of permanence, Eleanor looked at herself in the small mirror she had taped inside. The woman looking back at her had wrinkles from tiredness, rough hands from years of hard work, but also eyes brighter than before, a firmer posture. She was the same woman who had entered the building months ago, nervous and scared, hoping to be invisible. But now she saw herself, and that changed everything. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor's routine became natural, automatic. She knew every corner of the building, every difficult stain, every detail that required special attention, but more importantly, she knew the people. She learned the names of the executives who passed quickly. She knew who drank black coffee and who preferred it with milk. She knew which offices remained tidy and which were always a mess. And something curious began to happen. People started greeting her. It wasn't universal. Many still passed without seeing her, absorbed in their phones, in their worries, but others stopped. "Good day, Eleanor. How are you? How is your son doing?" At first, Eleanor responded with surprise, almost with distrust, but gradually, she learned to accept those interactions as what they were, a basic recognition of humanity. One morning, while cleaning the break area, one of the young executives approached her. "Excuse me, are you the mother of the boy who speaks Mandarin?" she asked. Eleanor straightened up. "Yes, I am." The woman smiled. "My younger brother is at the same school. He told me about the presentation your son did. He said it was impressive." Eleanor felt her chest swell with pride. "He's a good kid." "It shows he had a good teacher," the executive commented. "Not many kids value learning like he does." When the woman walked away, Eleanor stood holding the cleaning cloth, feeling something warm run through her body. It wasn't just pride in Ethan, it was something deeper. It was validation that all the effort, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights had been worth it. But not everything was a bright moment. There were also dark days. One day, while cleaning near the executive offices, she overheard a conversation not intended for her ears. "It's obvious Julian did this for image," a male voice was saying. "After the contract thing, he needed to look good." Another voice replied with a cynical tone. "Typical. They hire a cleaner permanently, give the son benefits, and wash their hands saying they're an inclusive company." Eleanor felt her stomach clench. She stood frozen behind the door, her heart pounding. "At least the kid seems smart," the first voice continued. But how long will it last? These charity cases never end well. Eleanor clenched her fists. She wanted to go in. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, but she knew she couldn't. She knew that giving them the satisfaction of seeing her affected would only confirm their prejudices. She took a deep breath, forced herself to calm down, and continued with her work. But the words were stuck like thorns. That night, Eleanor didn't tell Ethan anything. She didn't want to burden him with the weight of other people's opinions. He already had enough with his own battles, but Ethan noticed anyway. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" he asked as they ate dinner. Eleanor forced a smile. Just a long day. Ethan watched her with those eyes that seemed to see too much. "If anyone tells you something bad, don't listen to them," he said. "We know the truth." Eleanor felt her eyes well up. "How did you get so perceptive?" "I had a good teacher," Ethan replied with a small smile. It was an echo of what the executive had told her that morning. Eleanor laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I guess so." The days continued. Eleanor kept working with the same dedication, with the same excellence, not to prove anything to anyone, but because that was who she was. Hard work was in her nature, in her bones. One Friday afternoon, Robert called her to his office. Eleanor felt a moment of irrational panic. Had she done something wrong? Were they going to fire her? "Relax," Robert said, noticing her expression. "It's good news." Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief. "What is it?" Robert handed her an envelope. "It's your first quarter evaluation," he explained. "I want you to see it." Eleanor opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a document with several categories: punctuality, quality of work, attitude, teamwork. In all categories, there were marks for excellent. At the end was a handwritten comment. "Eleanor has proven to be an exemplary employee. Her dedication and professionalism are an asset to the team. I recommend considering opportunities for growth." Eleanor read the words twice, 3 times. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This is," she began, but her voice broke. Robert smiled. "It's what you deserve. You've worked hard, Eleanor. And it shows." Eleanor felt the tears fall freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Robert replied. "You earned this." When Eleanor left the office, she held the envelope against her chest, as if it were the most precious object in the world. In a way, it was. It was tangible proof that it wasn't charity, it wasn't a favor, it was merit. That night, she showed the document to Ethan. He read it carefully. Then he hugged her tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I'm supposed to be saying that about you." "We can be proud of each other," Ethan replied. They stayed hugging for a long moment, 2 people who had fought so hard and were finally seeing the fruits of that struggle. Over the weekend, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in years. She invited her Aunt Chloe to eat, not in an expensive restaurant, but in her house, with food she prepared herself. But it was a luxury to be able to do it without counting every penny, without worrying if there would be enough for the rest of the month. Her aunt arrived with flowers, a simple but significant gesture. When she saw Eleanor's evaluation framed in the kitchen, her eyes welled up. "I always knew you were special," she said, hugging her sister. "But now the world knows it too." Eleanor shook her head. "Not the world, just a few people, but it's enough." They ate, talked, laughed. Ethan told them about his classes, about his new friends, about the Mandarin project he was working on. The house filled with voices, with joy, with life. When her aunt left, Eleanor stood at the door, watching her walk away. Ethan stood beside her. "It was a good day," he commented. Eleanor put her arm over his shoulders. "It was a very good day." The following Monday, Eleanor arrived at work with renewed energy, greeted the guard by name, chatted briefly with the receptionist, and went up to the floor with a firm step. In the cafeteria, Patricia was waiting for her with coffee. "I saw your evaluation," she said with a smile. "Robert told us." "Congratulations," Eleanor smiled. "Thank you. You deserve it," Patricia continued. "You've worked like no one else." While they drank coffee, Eleanor realized something. She wasn't alone. Not only did she have Ethan, not only did she have her aunt, she had colleagues, she had a team, she had people who saw her, who valued her. During her shift that day, Eleanor worked with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just a job, it was her job. It wasn't just a place, it was her place. Mid-afternoon, while cleaning near the offices, she saw Julian talking with some executives. He noticed her and gave a brief nod. Eleanor responded the same way. They didn't need words. That simple exchange said everything necessary. Mutual recognition, respect, understanding that both had done their part. At the end of the day, while putting away her things, Eleanor looked around the locker room. Her name was on a locker. Her uniform hung clean and ironed. Her evaluation had been excellent. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still challenges, there were still difficult days, but it was a dignified life. A life she had built with her own hands, with her own effort. And that, Eleanor thought, as she closed her locker, it was more than many people had. She left the building with the sun still shining. Ethan would be waiting for her at home, probably doing homework at the kitchen table. They would have dinner together, talk about their days, plan the future. A future that now, for the first time in a long time, seemed bright. Eleanor walked toward the bus stop with her head held high, her shoulders straight. She was not the same woman who had entered that building months ago, scared and apologizing for existing. She was someone stronger now, someone who knew her worth, someone who wasn't afraid to take up space. And when she got on the bus and sat by the window watching the city go by, Eleanor smiled because she finally understood something fundamental. She had never been invisible. She had just been waiting for someone to really look, and now that they were, she was ready to shine. 6 months had passed since that day, when a phone rang and changed everything. 6 months in which Ethan had transformed his insecurity into confidence, in which Eleanor had stopped apologizing for existing. 6 months in which both had learned something fundamental. Value is not given, it is recognized. It was Friday afternoon, and the school was holding its annual semester closing event. Ethan had been selected to give a speech on behalf of the new students. When he was given the news, his first reaction was panic. "I can't do that," he told Eleanor that night. "Speak in front of the whole school, in front of the parents, in front of everyone." Eleanor looked at him with that expression he knew well, the one that meant she wouldn't accept excuses. "You already spoke in front of executives when you saved a multi-million-dollar contract," she said. "This is no different." "It is completely different," Ethan protested. "That was over the phone. This is face-to-face with hundreds of people." Eleanor sat down in front of him. "Do you remember what I told you that time? It's not about being perfect. It's about being authentic." Ethan sighed. "I remember." "Then, just be yourself," she said. "Tell your story. Words that come from the heart always find their way." During the following days, Ethan worked on his speech. He wrote version after version, each one different from the last. Some were too formal, others too casual. Nothing felt right. One night, while struggling with the words, Eleanor entered his room. "Can I see?" she asked. Ethan handed her the notebook in frustration. "It's not coming out right." Eleanor read in silence. Then she looked at her son. "You're trying to write what you think they want to hear," she said. "But what they need to hear is your truth." "And what is my truth?" Ethan asked. Eleanor closed the notebook and handed it back to him. "That's an answer only you can give." That night, Ethan stayed up late. He closed his eyes and thought about his grandmother. He thought about the afternoons at her house, about the smell of her kitchen, about the sound of her voice, teaching him words he never imagined he would use. He thought about his mother, working impossible shifts, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities. He thought about that day in the hallway when he had to decide whether to speak or remain silent. And then, the words began to flow. The day of the event arrived with a clear sky. Eleanor requested permission from work to attend. Julian personally approved her leaving. "Go see your son," he told her. "This is important." When Eleanor arrived at the school auditorium, she was impressed by the size of the place. There were hundreds of seats, a large stage, professional lights. It was a completely different world from the one she knew. She sat in one of the middle rows, among other well-dressed parents who talked about vacations and universities. Eleanor wore her best clothes, but still felt out of place until she remembered her son's words. "I don't need to be like them. I just need to be myself." The event began with the principal giving a welcome. Then there were musical performances, academic recognitions, sports awards. Eleanor clapped politely, but her heart beat faster as the time for Ethan's speech approached. Finally, the principal announced, "And now I would like to invite to the stage one of our newest students who will share some reflections with us, Ethan Mendez." Eleanor felt her heart jump into her throat. She saw her son walk onto the stage with measured steps. He wore a simple but clean shirt, pants she had carefully ironed that morning. They weren't expensive clothes, but they were dignified. Ethan stood in front of the microphone. For a moment, he seemed to freeze. Eleanor could see the panic in his eyes as he looked at the sea of faces in front of him. But then Ethan took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good afternoon. My name is Ethan, and 6 months ago, I didn't know if I belonged here." His voice trembled slightly, but he continued. "I come from a different place than many of you. My mom works in cleaning. We live in a small apartment, where sometimes we hear the neighbors arguing through the walls. Before coming here, I went to a school where the books were broken, and the windows didn't close well in winter." Eleanor felt tears forming. Some parents in the auditorium shifted uncomfortably, but Ethan didn't stop. "When I arrived here, I thought I would have to hide that. I thought I would have to pretend to be someone different. But my mom taught me something important. Origin does not define destiny. Effort does." Ethan's voice became firmer. "I learned Mandarin with my grandmother, not in an expensive school or with certified teachers. I learned it in a small kitchen among pots and memories, because she needed to speak her language so as not to forget who she was. And I needed to listen to her so as not to forget that the most valuable things don't always come packaged in luxuries." Some parents began to pay more attention. The students were completely silent. One day, that language I learned out of love gave me the opportunity to help someone, and that help opened doors for me that I never thought would open, but it wasn't the language that really mattered. It was the attention. It was the dedication. It was not being afraid to use what I had, even if it wasn't perfect. Ethan paused, searching for the right words. "Being here has taught me that privilege is not bad. Having resources is not bad. But ignoring those who don't have them, assuming that only certain people deserve opportunities, that is a problem." Eleanor saw some parents nodding. "I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty," Ethan continued. "I'm here to remind you that talent exists everywhere. Intelligence exists everywhere. Dedication exists everywhere. But opportunity does not." His voice was now clear, strong, without a trace of fear. "So to my classmates who come from families like mine, I say, don't be ashamed. Use your story as strength, not as an excuse. Work twice as hard if necessary, but never accept that you deserve less." He looked directly at the audience. "And to those who have more, I ask you, don't look away. Don't assume that people in humble jobs are invisible. My mom cleans offices, but she also taught me values that no money can buy. Dignity doesn't come with a job title. It comes from how we treat others." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. 6 months ago, a phone call changed my life. But not because I answered in Mandarin. It changed my life because someone decided to look beyond the obvious. Someone decided that potential matters more than packaging. Ethan took a deep breath for his final sentence. "All of you have the power to be that person for someone else. To see talent where others see limitations. To open doors instead of building walls. Because in the end, we won't be remembered for how much we had, but for how much we shared." He paused. "Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Mom, for teaching me that I deserve to be here." Ethan walked off the stage as the auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine, enthusiastic applause. Some parents stood up, then more, until the whole auditorium was standing. Eleanor was openly weeping now, not caring who saw her. Her son, that boy who had carried so much on his small shoulders, had just spoken with a clarity and maturity that took her breath away. When Ethan came down from the stage, he walked straight to his mother. Eleanor hugged him tightly, feeling his body tremble with adrenaline and relief. "You did incredible," she whispered. "I'm so proud." Ethan clung to her. "I couldn't have done it without you." They stayed hugging while the event continued around them. Two people who had fought against everything to get there. After the event, several parents approached Eleanor and Ethan, some to congratulate, others simply to shake their hands. An elegant woman stopped in front of Eleanor. "Your son has a bright future," she said sincerely. "And it's clear where that strength comes from." Eleanor felt her face burn, but this time not from shame, but from pride. "Thank you," she replied with her head held high. Valentina ran up to Ethan. "That was the best speech I've ever heard," she said excitedly. "You made half the auditorium cry." Ethan laughed nervously. "I hope they were good tears." "The best," she confirmed. As they left the auditorium, Eleanor noticed someone waiting near the entrance. It was Julian Vance. He was wearing casual clothes, not his usual suit. Eleanor was surprised to see him there. "Mr. Vance," she said, approaching. "I didn't know you would come." Julian smiled. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "After all, I have some responsibility in this story." He turned to Ethan. "That speech was exceptional, young man. You spoke truths that many adults don't dare to say." Ethan lowered his gaze modestly. "I just said what I felt." "That's exactly what made it powerful," Julian replied. They walked together toward the parking lot. Julian told them he had closely followed the progress of both. Eleanor's evaluations, Ethan's grades, everything had exceeded expectations. But that doesn't surprise me, he added. You always had what it took. You just needed the opportunity to prove it. Eleanor felt something break inside her, but in a good way, like when a dam that has contained water for too long finally opens. Thank you, she said with a trembling voice, for seeing us when we were invisible. Julian shook his head. You were never invisible, Eleanor. You were just in a system that didn't know how to look. That's the system that needs to change, isn't it? They said goodbye with a handshake. But before leaving, Julian turned one last time. By the way, he said, we are implementing a scholarship program at the company for children of employees who demonstrate academic excellence. Ethan was the inspiration. Eleanor felt the tears return. Really? Really, Julian confirmed. Sometimes a story has the power to change more than one life. It can change an entire culture. When he left, Eleanor and Ethan stood in the parking lot, processing everything that had happened. Mom, Ethan said after a moment, do you remember when you asked me if I did the right thing? Eleanor nodded. The day you answered the phone. Ethan smiled. Now I know the answer. I didn't do the right thing just by answering. I did the right thing because I wasn't afraid to be who I am. Eleanor hugged him again. That's the most important lesson of all. The following months brought more changes. Ethan continued to excel in school, not only in Mandarin but in all subjects. He became a volunteer tutor for students who had difficulties with languages. His patience and empathy made him exceptional in that role. Eleanor, for her part, was promoted to shift supervisor. It was a small but significant position. Now she had her own small office, her own team, and she treated every member with the respect she herself had yearned for years. Patricia joked that she was the kindest boss she had ever had. Eleanor replied that kindness didn't mean weakness. It meant remembering where you came from. A year after the day everything changed, the company organized an annual event for employees. It was the first time Eleanor attended something like that. Julian went up to the stage to give a speech about the year's achievements. And I want to recognize something special, he said, looking out at the audience. A year ago, we almost lost a crucial contract, not due to lack of capacity, but due to lack of vision. An unexpected situation showed us that talent and value exist in places where we weren't looking. Eleanor felt all eyes turned to her. Since then, we have implemented significant development programs for all employees, regardless of position, scholarships for families, language training, and most importantly, a culture that values every person, not just those in the corner offices. Applause filled the hall. I want to specially thank Eleanor Mendez and her son Ethan for reminding us that excellence has no pedigree. It just needs opportunity. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes, but this time she didn't hold them back. She let them fall freely as the entire room applauded. That night, back home, Ethan and Eleanor had dinner together as always, but the conversation was different. They no longer talked about surviving, they talked about dreaming. You know what I want to do when I'm older? Ethan asked. Eleanor smiled. What? I want to create language programs for underserved communities, he said. I want other kids like me to be able to learn, not because their parents can pay, but because they have the desire. Eleanor felt her heart expand. Your grandmother would be so proud. Ethan nodded. And you, Mum? What do you want to do? Eleanor thought for a moment. I want to stay where I am, she replied. But I want to make sure that no one on my team feels invisible. I want to be for others what Julian was for us. That's a beautiful goal, Ethan said. They were silent for a moment, enjoying the simplicity of being together. You know what's the craziest thing about all this? Eleanor finally said. What? That it started with something as simple as a phone call? A moment that could have gone unnoticed, changed everything. Ethan reflected on that. It wasn't just the call, Mom. It was everything that came before. The nights you worked, the times you sacrificed so I could have school supplies, the afternoons with Grandma. All of that prepared me for that moment. Eleanor felt tears again. Sometimes we don't know we're preparing for something big. Maybe that's the point, Ethan replied. We must always be ready, because we never know when our opportunity will arrive. 2 years later, Ethan graduated from high school with honors. Eleanor was in the front row, crying with pride. Julian also attended, along with several colleagues from the company who had followed the story. When Ethan received his diploma, the applause was deafening. But beyond the academic recognition, what really mattered was the path he had traveled to get there. In his graduation speech, Ethan spoke again about opportunities, about seeing beyond appearances, about the power of a person who decides to make a difference. "We all have a call to answer," he said. "Not necessarily in Mandarin, not necessarily in an office, but we all have that moment where we can choose between remaining silent or speaking, between hiding or showing ourselves, between accepting that the world is unfair or working to change it." His words resonated in the auditorium, full of graduates and families. "I chose to speak," he continued. "My mom chose to keep fighting when it would have been easier to give up, and someone else chose to see our value when no one else did. Those choices changed our lives." He looked directly at the audience. "What will you choose?" The applause that followed was thunderous. Years later, Ethan would fulfill his promise. He created a foundation for language instruction for marginalized communities. Eleanor continued in the company, eventually becoming operations manager, and Julian expanded his opportunity programs to other companies. But the most important thing was not the titles or the achievements. It was the silent change that occurred in hundreds of lives. The people who were seen when they were previously invisible, the talents that were recognized when they were previously ignored, the doors that were opened when they were previously closed. Because in the end, this was not just the story of a boy who answered a phone. It was the story of what happens when someone decides to look beyond the obvious, when someone chooses dignity over indifference, when someone understands that human value is not measured by position or bank account, but by heart and effort. Eleanor and Ethan never forgot where they came from, but they also didn't let that define how far they could go. And somewhere, in a place beyond time, Grandma Anya smiled, because the words she had taught her grandson in that small kitchen not only preserved a language, they preserved a connection, a memory, a legacy that would end up changing lives. Sometimes the biggest things start with the smallest gestures: a grandmother teaching words, a mother working in silence, a boy answering a phone, and a man deciding to look. That's all it takes to change a life, or maybe to change the world.